Hi to our listeners and to our IONet team. How are we doing today?
Good, good. How are you?
Oh, fine, thanks. Uh, for our listeners, I just want to make an announcement, and I'll make an announcement at the end as well. Next week, we will be holding another uh, internal AMA, and we will have one of our founders, Basim, in, who will be talking about some of our recent product launches with the rest of the team. And then we are planning a Discord AMA for the community that will be happening later this month. So to let you know, there are more AMAs happening and more IO team will be involved. But we've got a lot of questions from the community that we'll be able to answer today. Let's start with some product questions. First one is any new information about TNE on chain?
TNE on chain should be actually live by this coming Tuesday.
Why will the one M4 base system be onboarded?
There should be some marketing guy to actually explain. I think from the tech side, we've already decided on details. I think we are waiting for a marketing input to go, and post that we can launch it. I think that's where the thing is. Internally, I think details have been decided. I think we need to create a marketing event for it and push for it. Uh, I can come back to it. I can check and come back to it on this.
Okay. Uh, will the minimum internet speed requirement for worker operations be updated?
Come again? I don't understand the question.
Sure. The minimum internet speed requirement for worker operations be updated.
We haven't updated anything for the internet speed till now. Like
Okay.
there's no change like recently for the internet speed at all. What we have done is we basically started giving a higher factor of the rewards for the better internet, the high speed internet, but we haven't changed the requirement per se for the internet itself.
I think it just went on mute.
Yeah. Oh, let me add him again. While we're waiting for him to join us again, Sasif, I have a question from the community uh, for you. In what ways does IONET's decentralized GPU network contribute to the development of Web3 workflows in the decentralized economy?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think I've talked about this a few times before, but realistically, kind of how we think about, the decentralized AI economy at IONET is really in terms of the decentralized AI tech stack, right? Us at IONET, we essentially provide the foundational sort of compute layer that's kind of powers all things AI and is sort of like the key element that drives innovation and progress, and is sort of a scaling factor for that on the compute side. But in terms of sort of how we think about decentralized AI developers themselves, and what they would need on their end to kind of really build a decentralized AI app. Like we provide the compute side, but then we also partner with a variety of different decentralized AI partners who sort of work on different parts of that tech stack, right? And whether that's sort of on the decentralized data side, whether that's like data providers like Dana and like CrunchDAO and like Grass and those guys, or if it's like decentralized storage, like Filecoin, Arweave, Iris, folks like that, all the way to people who are building more uh, distributed sort of like protocols for key AI development elements, right? Whether it's like distributed training, fine tuning, inference, proof of inference, stuff like that. So that's sort of like one angle of how we come into the contribute to the development of sort of the decentralized economy, especially as it relates to AI, more on the development workflow side. I think the other interesting element too is with the release of IO Intelligence, it essentially is a way for a variety of developers to access the latest and greatest open source models, whether that's Llama 3.3, DeepSeek R1, Quen 2.5, a variety of them. And we actually host these on decentralized compute that we'll be able to aggregate through, building up our DePIN. And that is sort of another way that we're offering kind of a differentiated, product to the market where we're able to provide um, essentially a decentralized AI API to all the developers out there who just want to build sort of a great AI app without having to even manage their own sort of decentralized AI infrastructure. So those are a couple ways that us at IONET we're really helping contribute to the decentralized AI economy with our GPU network.
Great. And let me ask you, Tassif, while Gaurav is dealing with a technical issue, how is that developed and seen? The team has gone to consensus in ETH Denver. How have you seen the workflows and decentralized economy come out of your conversations that you had at ETH Denver last week?
Yeah, I think Denver actually was a very interesting experience this time around. There was a lot of excitement for sure, but there was sort of excitement in very specific segments of Web3. And I think the areas that definitely had sort of like the most energy were around AI and DeepIn, right? Because I think a lot of people are really excited by those narratives. They're really excited by the potential that both of these offer. And I think, these are some of the areas where we start to see some of the earliest inklings of real world use cases come in and real world usage and revenue and things like that. So those were areas that kind of had a lot of excitement, right? So I think in most of my conversations at Denver around that, I think folks were really kind of uh, sort of discussing what the intersection of AI and crypto looks like, with sort of like DeepIn also thrown in. And, some of the areas that I just talked about in terms of the decentralized AI ecosystem, different aspects of that really kind of stood out. So I think decentralized compute is one of the first ones that, or one of the first areas where people are starting to see the signs of maturity in the market, the signs of kind of real world like Web2 customers starting to adopt Web3 solutions without caring about sort of like the underlying native infrastructure, as long as it sort of solves like the customer problem that they have. And I think really starting to build on top of that with a lot of like the decentralized data, a lot of agent launchpads, tokenization, sort of distributed training protocols, things like that, were kind of layered on top and also drove a lot of excitement. I think there's definitely a significant amount of excitement in that I heard from a lot of like the decentralized training and inference verification sort of projects and protocols as well, right? Because I think that sort of takes it up to that next layer of decentralized AI development. Beyond just what the foundational compute or data layer is, it's about sort of how do we actually take decentralized compute, make it more practical, and move the decentralization further up the tech and AI development stack. So I think things that were seemingly impossible maybe a year or two ago when it came to decentralized training and inference verification and zk proofs and FHE are now starting to show really promising signs of working, whether it's like a proof of concept or sort of initial sort of smaller models that are being released by some folks out there. I think that was an area that that kind of really stood out there. I think people are very excited about. And lastly, with the AI agent economy, obviously a huge portion of the conversation there as well. But I think there was a real sense of, you know, the initial wave of AI agents where folks just had kind of a, you know, OpenAI API plugged into a Twitter bot and then tokenized it. And, you know, now all of our timelines are just filled with a bunch of reply bots. I think people have quickly grown tired of that meta. And, you know, I think the ones that grab mindshare for that sort of narrative, you know, they're already up there, and I don't think we're going to get new winners in that space. So I think there was a real sort of hunger for more real use cases for AI agents that leverage Web3 or crypto in some way. And I think this next wave of AI agents that are being built, there were a lot of exciting projects that were there kind of talking about what they were building, will really make AI agents a lot more tangible and kind of really break out of that meta of just being Twitter reply bots. So those were some of the most exciting things that I heard at eDenver last week.
Yeah, it sounds like the classic issue anytime in our space that there's new innovation, we're starting to see more use cases and demand for things in the wild. We'll be talking more about how our products like IO Intelligence help support that and support the concept of the AI supercloud that we've been talking about as an organization. But I want to, now that Gaurav's back, switch over to talking about the topic of the offboarding of workers.
Yeah, guys, so sorry. Like I had my younger daughter here, who's like a 1-year-old. So was distracted earlier, and then she literally closed the browser earlier. So I had to come back again.
No apologies for being a family man.
So what was the question? Come again. There were a couple of questions.
Yeah, so
right?
let's talk about offboarding workers and move to that.
Okay.
Because there are some questions from the community.
Yeah, sure.
The first we want to talk about, we'll break this down into two subcategories. First, about the communication and overview of the offboarding workers. The question is, what is the requirements for workers that have been offboarded from the network?
See, basically what we have done is we have divided the network into two pieces, right? We have basically divided the network into the enterprise one and the community hardware, the two kind of hardwares, right? Now, for the enterprise level hardware, where the majority of the revenue is coming in, there are certain requirements from the enterprise which is coming in, right? Like I think that's what the question earlier also was. For instance, anytime we bring in any enterprise customer, and let's say they ask for, let's say, 100 GPUs in a single location, in a single data center, because they want to train their LLM there, right? Now, over there, there's a requirement, like unilaterally, almost in all last like 5-6 deals which we have done, is that they want at least 10 gigabits per second as the speed, network speed, right? So that by default, then we actually made a requirement for the network. I think that was the question earlier also. So that becomes the requirement for the enterprise grade hardware, because honestly speaking, if you take a look at the enterprise hardware, which is H100, the H200s, or the A100s, the way their multiplier is, they take a decent amount of chunk of the block rewards on a monthly basis. So they getting a higher standard and keeping the higher standard because they're making more reward as a part of it is I think is logically correct, right? I can't give more rewards to a person when they're not even adhering to a higher standard. So these enterprise grade hardware, yes, their requirements actually went higher, that their network speed should be good, their storage should be high, because there were certain cases where somebody was giving like 10 GPUs, and in one of the cases the disk space was like less than 30 gigabytes, 30 GBs, right? Now that hardware you can't sell to anywhere, right? So wherever we saw that the rewards to respective hardware is high, we basically kept a standard which would be required by any enterprise who will come to rent it, or even let's say a college student who will come and try to create their model will require. And that's a requirement we put. And if people are not meeting those requirements, which is the speed of 10 gigabit per second for H100s, the disk space, then we move them out. I think there's a document for it already. I think there were some details also shared, and I think we can share it to the community also, and I think on the Discord going forward for it. That's what the main reason is, that some of the hardware recently got moved out. Although their uptime was good, but when we're basically trying to rent it out and people are creating Ray cluster on it, or they're basically we are trying to rent it to the enterprises, then there are some hardware which are not meeting these standards, right? So what do we expect, right? Like if I keep this hardware, then it cannot be rented out to people, right? So it will not earn revenue, and it will take a huge amount of chunk of block rewards going forward. And there are lower level hardware like 4090s who are meeting huge requirements, but they will not get good enough block rewards, although they have high standards. So it's unfair to those hardwares. So that's why, depending on the rewards which we give and the type of hardware, we kept certain requirements recently. To be honest, those requirements were always there. We just started adhering to it, that if you're not doing it, we will send you a warning, and if you're still not able to meet it, we'll move you out. That's what happened recently. Does it answer your question?
Yes, and just as a reminder, we will have an interactive AMA coming up on the Discord that will allow live questions. One of the things the community is wondering about is, there is a belief that this is prioritizing centralized data centers. And what you were saying is that it's not doing that, correct?
No, there'll be a lot of people here who basically will be community people, and they have their MacBooks, their 4090s, and even 100 and H100 Live. Right? The problem is when you are basically giving also these H100s, where you're earning like literally huge amount of rewards compared to 4090s, and you're basically keeping the standard of the network and disk space and everything to a level where it cannot be hired, then it becomes a problem. If those standards are being met, then it's fine.
And then for future offboarding, the community is wondering about communication on it and suggestions that they can make about offboarding. So we'll take them one at a time. The first one is, if there is future offboarding, what is going to be the communication with the workers?
So we first of all will basically in the AMA announce like what we will be going to do, and then we'll take an action next to it, right? For instance, we already told in past that we'll be basically onboarding M4s, which we are doing in next week, and we'll be moving out M2s, right? We basically made this announcement almost like 3 to 4 weeks earlier, and then now we'll take an action on it, right? We'll do something similar going forward for the hardware also. That when we actually decide to move it out, we'll make an announcement first, and then we'll move. If we do it, and whenever that if comes in, if it ever comes, then we'll do that. Right now, like at least it's not there in the near future. Like guys, like I do understand, right? It's frustrating, right? If your rewards are extremely good, you're earning good rewards, and suddenly you're moved out, it's frustrating, right? Because you literally are getting like free rewards by giving you hardware twice the price or thrice the price of you would have rented in the hardware, right? And suddenly if you stop getting that money, like it's not good. It feels frustrating, right? Like and I feel for it, right? But if I be unbiased, and I think from the network perspective, the network will only do good as a project, right? When the hardware is of a quality that it can be rented outside. And and as a part of that, if somebody moves out, it's frustrating, it's painful, and they will say bad things. And I do understand where they're coming from. But like if you think of the project and the bigger things, like sometimes like these steps have to be taken, although they are not very like good to certain people, unfortunately. Like we have to think of a greater good, honestly.
And let's move on to some questions about offboarding that the community has. The first one is, will those that had their 4090 GPUs removed be given priority in adding the M4 Pro?
Yeah, I think that we discussed earlier also, that when we actually move 4090s and the M2s which we move out, those guys will be given preference to bring the M4s in.
Right. And are workers going to have to wait 14 days to cool down after they're offboarded?
So we are working on a process where they don't need to do that. So we are working on that, and I think hopefully next week it should be done. So uh, feel free to escalate a support ticket if in case you are basically being offboarded because of any of these reasons for your tokens to be unstaked. Feel free to raise a ticket to the support team, and we're working on some changes in a smart contract where it should be possible to do that. We don't have that change But we're working on that so that this friction doesn't come. And by next week, hopefully, we'll be there.
And then how is uptime calculated, and what specific criteria determine when a worker is at risk of offboarding?
So there are two pieces to it, right? One is, I think if for 30 days you're inactive, by default you're moved out, right? Then there's no discussion, right? Then on the other side, on the H100 sides and other sides, there are a few parameters which come in, which is, let's say if you're rented, if you get hired, and then consistently you basically drop off from the hired inventory, right? Then it gets impacted because you're impacting the network. And I think other than that, if your uptime starts to go below 90, again, it depends on hardware to hardware. um, like the hardware which gets a higher uh, factor, uh, the higher block rewards, we basically create a higher standard for them, and that's why the percentage differ. For some hardware it will be like 95 to 97%, and for some it will be lower, but that's depending on the multiplier for the project, of the hardware.
And
But
then we have yeah, go ahead.
no, it's okay, it's okay. Go ahead.
Sure. And then some of the community are wondering that that they feel the same device, the same network, the same configuration, but different accounts. Some have been offboarded and some are not, and just wanted some clarification there.
So again, like from their perspective, they see that okay, so it's the same hardware, same specification and everything, right? They don't know about the network speed, they don't know about the storage space. And I think it matters a lot, right? For example, we basically, one of the guys we offboarded recently as a network, when we were looking at the metric, was that the GPU was good, they had a good data storage, but their CPU was consistently high, like consistently high. Like it was like 30-40% always, like being idle also. We gave that particular hardware a warning, we gave them space, and then they still didn't, like the performance still didn't improve. Then we had to, like, as a network, they were moved out, right? Similarly, there were some players where the storage was extremely low, we gave them a warning, we gave them a time to improve, they didn't, they were moved out. So many times when you take a step back and you take a look at it, at the top level it looks same, that okay, this is a 4090, this is a 4090, right? And you're removing this 4090, not the other one. It's basically one level down. Is your network speed consistently good? Is your disk space, like of the space, like of the industry standard? Like those things also play in a picture. So like you may get a wrong variable at times if you just take a novice approach of just comparing model to model at times.
Great. I want to move on to talking about staking. The first question from the community is, what happens with the staking pool? What new address will the stake points be in?
So these things are TBD. Like we basically launched the first staking one, right? And I don't know how you want to claim it as good or bad. Like in my view, it was successful, but for some it is unsuccessful because I got some feedback on X. Like there were a bunch of offers which were created in the first day, and the moment they were created, within an hour it went out. So it was good in a way that we thought that people will apply for it, and we saw that some suppliers did seek for help, and within half an hour, 1 hour, all the demand for those requests were gone, right? But so in one view, it is successful. But for many people, they basically came to me and said, like, I go to the platform and there's no bids there. For them, it's unsuccessful. They are expecting that anytime they go to the platform, they always have a bid, right? So I think the phase one for us was successful because we saw a bunch of bids coming in, and within an hour, people coming in and taking it out, right? So in that scenario, the phase one is over. Now we're working on phase two. Similar to phase one, phase two, we need to think of the numbers also. Like it's just not about tech, it's about the balance of the supply also. Like for example, you're just like we were just discussing at length that some suppliers inventory went out and they're frustrated their inventory went out, right? And I do understand, like I sympathize with them that like the earnings were removed, right, as a part of that process, right? They're frustrated. Now imagine if same thing happens, that you're a supplier and suddenly a portion of your rewards starts going to a staking pool. Like that could also lead to a concern, right? So what the right number is from the block rewards, where the right balance is, where is like that the stakers are also happy and the supplier is also happy. Uh, it's a very nuanced thing, right? You have to like really do a deep analysis, talk to a bunch of like suppliers or people we know of, right? From Telegram groups which they reach, and once we get the overall feedback, then from there we can, as a network, decide that okay, this is the right percentage. I think that's where we are kind of stuck. Tech wise, I think we're 90% there for phase two, which is the centralized pool, and then everybody stake the coin and they get a portion of that out of that pool. That part is done, but the supplier side of things are like that thing is there. So again, like it's basically a marketplace, right? But there are times when the consumer side becomes happy, but the supplier will become unhappy that oh, they are earning less of the portion of the money, right? Then supplier will say, oh, we are making not that much of money which we used to. And if you make sure the supplier gets it, then the consumer. So in these places, the very nuanced thing at times, keeping both the side happy uh, needs a lot of analysis. And I think that's what we're doing right now.
And so, questions about when phase two will begin, documentations about phase two, that's an ongoing internal review and analysis.
Yes.
Yep. All right. I want to move on to some suggestions that the community has and thoughts. The first one is allocation of the token to reward community activities through server events.
Who this question to? I'm sorry, I don't
Oh,
understand.
that's
Is
you,
it a
sir.
marketing question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's the same thing is what I'm hearing is we're listening to the community and taking these suggestions into account, and we'll use these AMAs to share where updates occur. Will the next question I have from the community is if someone has rented a device, created a cluster, and wants to use that power, is there going to be more educational content in the pipeline on how to use it?
I think one thing I want to clear, like I am seeing some messages on the community channel, right? I think I want to handle that question, right? Because I have seen this message a couple of times earlier also. Uh, I really sympathize with these couple of people whose hardware got booted out. Like I'm genuinely saying I have sympathy around it, right? But like couple of things, right? One, we have to think of the overall project when you move hardware out, right? And second thing is, honestly, we never asked someone to buy the hardware specifically to earn the block rewards. Like we literally were clear right from beginning, don't do that, right? Like please don't do that. Because if you do that and then you are not a professional, you don't know how to maintain the hardware and all those things. And later on, when something happens that you cannot compete with the people who are more matured in the network, and if something like in the competition of the network, you're not able to like remain with that standard, and like things like this happen that you moved out, then you get frustrated, right? We were always clear. If you take a look at the TNC policy also, you'll always be clear. We were very, very clear on this, that just don't buy hardware specifically to do this. Like it's not a great idea, right? So again, I see this message. So I do sympathize, but please understand as a project, we need to think of the overall network and just not as individual that, okay, like just because like you couldn't like stay at a standard and you got booted out, you're getting frustrated at why I'm being moved out compared to other people.
Got it. So then, is there anything else that at this point to share about offboarding of workers? Because that covers the main thrust. Anything else you want to add to that, Gaurav, before we move to a different subject?
No, I think we already discussed at length. It should be okay.
Yeah. The next question is about how does IO plan to balance incentive and rewards between early adopters and new workers?
How do we keep a balance between the early adopter and new workers?
Yeah, and what's future plans for that?
So we always give a preference to the early adopters by default, right? Uh, Logical reasons, right? Over there. Like if you basically, let's say, have 5 GPUs and you give another couple and the standard of the hardware is low, you will obviously be given preference on that side, right? So the old guys who are sitting in the queue already, they're always given preference over the new ones. Right now, in particular, there is no plans to add any enterprise hardware as of this week. I think in the coming week, the plan which we have is to actually add a M4, right? And if for any of the guys, if their hardware was moved out, I think what they should do is like they can literally ping me or they can go to the support team. When we are adding the M4 devices over there, they'll get a preference. So I think that is something which we as a network already committed, right? So there are a couple of people I see in the messages whose hardware were moved out. I think if they want to be part of the network, they can actually give M4 and we'll give them preference out there. As of enterprise hardware, there's no plans in this week to be added per se. The only plan for the coming week is for the M4s.
And then moving on to a question about governance, there was a question about when will the DAO be established?
I think that's a question which I think needs multiple people here, discussion around it. I don't think we have had discussion around it and a date for it for now.
Now I want to switch gears and ask you, Gaurav, and then Tassif, I'll be asking you afterward. How does IO view the democratization of AI access and development through its decentralized GPU network?
So I can take this one first, since Gaurav been speaking for most of this AMA. So I think in terms of how we think about democratization of AI access, there's a couple different ways that we've kind of approached it, right? And sort of we have this ethos in terms of how we're building IO, like the decentralized network, in terms of like how do we make it as easy as possible for AI and machine learning developers to build a decentralized AI application or program or whatever. How do we make that sort of like workflow as easy as possible for them, regardless of their level of sophistication, their skill set, and that's sort of like the view that we're really like working backwards from. So I think the first iteration of how we approached this was solving the case of lack of access to cost effective and flexible compute, which was kind of a major issue, and last year, but continues to be a major issue now, and we foresee that it will continue in the future as well. And our solution for that was essentially to build out the largest decentralized GPU network out there, right, and aggregate sort of underutilized resources from a variety of different sources, and make it as easy as possible for developers to be able to get access to that through our self-service on-demand front-end platform, the IO Cloud. So that first and foremost solved this issue of lack of access to compute for those developers who have that sophistication of being able to manage their own GPU infrastructure, update NVIDIA CUDA drivers, like work with Ray, Kubernetes, like really squeeze the performance out of bare metal machines, things like that. So that was sort of our first iteration of how we were essentially trying to democratize access to AI development to developers. I think sort of like the second one, and sort of like the more latest iteration that we have of how we're evolving on that vision too, was our launch of IO Intelligence, right? So IO Intelligence essentially hosts a number of open source models, the best ones out there, on Hugging Face on our decentralized compute, and it makes it accessible to um, either consumers through our chat playground or through app developers through our IO Intelligence API. And this actually democratizes access even further because considering the first cohort of developers I was talking about who could manage their own GPU infrastructure, there's probably 10 to 100x the number of developers out there who don't have that level of sophistication, right? Like they don't want to rent out GPUs, they don't want to manage their own infrastructure, they don't want to think about scaling up, scaling down, and all the headaches that come with it as their app gets used more. A lot of them just have really cool ideas in terms of what they want to build using AI, but they don't want to deal with all of the headaches that come with managing infrastructure. And with something like IO Intelligence and by tapping the API, they have the best AI open source models at their fingertips that they can plug in directly into their application and just enjoy the benefits of all the work that's been done by these foundational model labs and just plug them into their applications. So those are a couple different ways that we've been thinking about, and how we've been executing on democratizing access to AI for developers everywhere.
And Gaurav, same question over to you. You've talked about this in the past about how this supports teams and builders for innovation. Interested to hear your take.
So the way I think about it is that like in past, you used to have companies which will become a $10 million company first, and they'll spend 10, 15 years and then become a $1 billion company, right? And they'll have thousands of employees, thousands of employees when they become a $1 billion company, right? Then the industry improved, the economy of scale came in, the e-commerces of the world came in. You can literally see an example of WhatsApp where you had like 20, 25 employees and you became a $1 billion company, right? I think in the next step, you can become a $1 billion company with 5 or 7 employees. And in that future in software companies, AI and AI agents will play the major role. Right? So a lot of times people compare AI agents and all these things with the amount of code they can write automatically, or they think in terms of technical KPIs and specs, how much code they can write and all. I think that's not the right way to look at it, right? Like the AI agents will literally replace in a lot of roles humans, be it support, be it your boring jobs of taking notes, right? Making it concise, sharing with teams, finding what the best next action item is, and so on and so forth, right? So the AI agents, and the whole agentic frameworks over a period of time when they start to get matured, which is not very far, in the next couple of years or 3 years itself, it will add so much of productivity to the whole ecosystem that you will see a new era where earlier, when thousands of employees were needed to make a $1 billion business, it moved to getting a $1 billion business with only like 20, 30, 40 people also in like a span of 5, 6 years. This will go to the next level where you will be able to build a $1 billion business with only 5 or 7 people within a span of a year and a half. And all that economy will be enabled and will be powered by AI and AI agents. I think that's where the future is coming. And for a lot of roles, these agents will be going to like be replacing. And it's not a fear, because what will happen is like the smart guys will always find a problem to solve. And what will indirectly happen is that people will be able to focus just on their business context rather than focusing on the other periphery stuff which is not related to the business. All that periphery stuff which is not the core, that will be predominantly taken by the AI and AI agents, and the productivity of the whole team will become 5-10x going forward. And this will basically exponentially increase the number of startups you're going to see in the coming time, the rate at which the innovation will happen, and the whole economy and the valuation of this whole AI space is gonna get boomed in coming time, right? And that's what I see. And again, all this would be basically powered by like the fundamental things like your AI agents, the GPUs on which they run, the data and the product which provide the fundamental data which the model has to train, all these things. I think the future is very, very bright. We are in the very early phase of this whole AI ecosystem. The hockey stick growth hasn't even started yet. I think in a year and a half, the way we see these Web2 companies which never were into AI and the way they are adopting AI, the moment people start to get more and more matured, right, this hockey stick growth will come. Like I go to a couple of these like events in some colleges recently for coding competition and to review the projects. I basically see in the colleges right now that 70 to 80 projects are around just AI space. So you will see all these young engineers who are basically becoming fully trained in the AI space. In next couple of years, when they'll come to the real world in the industry, the amount of startups they'll start will be unforeseen, right? I think the best times are coming pretty soon.
Great. And just as a reminder for people that joined late, some of the questions in the chat have already been answered. And once it reposts, we'll be sending a organized list and timestamp so everyone can review and have questions answered. Next week, we will be having a product focused AMA on Twitter with one of our founders. It will be added. And then finally, in answer to some questions from the community, yes, we will be hosting a live AMA this month in our Discord. Stay tuned for more information. And also, we will be doing a special giveaway in next week's space. So make sure to tune in and set your reminders for our listeners and our IO Nation that join. IO team, as always, thank you for your time in answering these questions, and we will see you all next week. Thanks to our listeners.